Today we are wrapping up the All In series that's uh, um, taken from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14. It's good to see you, Martin. Very special mention, sorry. Mark 14, verse 32 to 41. Mark 14. If we can go there, I'm reading from the New King James Version. Then they came. Did I say 42? 32. 32. 32 to 41. Then they came to a place which was named Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took Peter, James, and John with him. And he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death." He's depressed. That's depression right there. Jesus is expressing to his disciples, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." He went a little farther and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." Then he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "Simon, are you sleeping?" It's funny because he only asked Simon, Peter, "Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak." Again he went away and prayed, and spoke the same words. And when he returned, he found them asleep again. Sounds familiar, guys? For their eyes were heavy. I feel like this is talking about me. And they did not know what to answer him. They were speechless. Then he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? It's enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners." Although I was trying to make it light and kind of joke around with the disciples falling asleep, this is really a very weighty portion of the gospel that you could read from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And this is a very weighty portion of Jesus' life here on earth, because actually there are only two instances that you and I can read in the gospels that Jesus expressed expressed or demonstrated a display of his emotions that are very raw. You know, the one time was when Lazarus died, and it says, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. And so there's no way that you don't have a memory verse in life. It's Jesus wept. But Jesus wept, and in that word it says that it's not just Jesus wept with a tear dropping down his cheek. It's really like really weeping. Jesus wept. And then the next time we see Jesus really being so raw with his emotions is this instance where he knows he's about to be betrayed by one of his disciples, where he knows that he's about to go through a very difficult process, a very difficult path. He knows that every step of that path is filled with pain. He is God. He is the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the prophets had already prophesied hundreds of years before crucifixion was ever invented. The prophet Isaiah had already prophesied about crucifixion before the Roman Empire even invented the idea of crucifying criminals on a cross. That has been prophesied through the prophet Isaiah, and this is hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And that is because Jesus, God, revealed that to the prophets of the manner of death that he was about to face. And Jesus Jesus, knowing the kind of death, the kind of process he's about to face as he desires to obey the will of God, goes through this very vulnerable moment in the Garden of Gethsemane. And the word Gethsemane is to be pressed. Very interesting, because the Garden of Gethsemane was called that way because it was the Garden of Olives, in the Mount of Olives. And there were a lot of olive trees, and there were also olive presses there, meaning to say the olive oil that we would normally just use for salad. You know, the process of getting the oil out of the olives goes through pressing. And in that garden, there were a lot of olive presses there. And that is also the garden where it says in the gospel where he took his disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane, which was his practice. Meaning to say, it reveals to us that Jesus often went to this garden to pray. And this time, he brings with him his disciples. And this is a very showy, almost a very private moment that he allows each of us to witness, that he allows his disciples to witness. Because, church, I want us to understand that although Jesus was God and Jesus was the Son of God, Paul the Apostle says in the book of Philippians that although he was God, he did not take on the form of God. He did not consider himself equal to God, but made himself lower. He humbled himself. And so although he was God, he embraced humanity. And this portion of the story actually shows us the frailty of humanity, which is us. I am so glad that this Garden of Gethsemane is in the gospel, because there is hope for people like me. Where I go through moments, where you go through moments of raw depression, of raw significant. Now, some of us, we are depressed for making the wrong choices. Some of us are depressed for other people's wrong choices. Here is Jesus wanting to do the will of God, and the idea of what he is about to go through in his attempt to obey God already overwhelms him. Jesus is not a God who is so distant, who can't relate with our raw emotional moments. This is a story of hope, church. But see, it also shows us, I want us to understand, let me backtrack a bit, that everything we see Jesus doing throughout the Gospels, he is not just doing because it is his Father's will. Yes, that is primarily why he would say what he heard the Father speak. That is primarily why he would only do what he saw his Father do. It was because he came to reveal the Father, but also he came to reveal who we are. Jesus came, let me repeat that. Jesus came to reveal who the Father is, but he also came to reveal who we really are. Meaning to say, the way I live, this is actually the design that you were made by. This is how you're designed to live. So everything he did, actually, when we read everything that Jesus did, when we read everything that Jesus said, the most appropriate response to when we read the Gospels should be, Jesus, if you said that, or if you made that decision, how do I do that? How do I imitate that in my life? Because remember, Jesus is not just showing us God's heart, he's showing us our original design. And so when he models when he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing he's about to obey the most difficult instruction from the Father, he modeled to us what we all must be willing to do if we know that our obedience is going to cost us. He's modeling to us that if you know your obedience to God is going to cost you some relationships, if your obedience to God is going to cost you maybe your promotion, if your obedience to God is going to cost you maybe some money, I want you to know that you can't obey without going through Gethsemane. He did not pick up the cross without first going down his knees. He did not pick up the cross without first going to Gethsemane. And Jesus modeled that for us, church. See, up to this point, Jesus' obedience took a lot of risks, but not yet the risk of death. Okay? Up to this point, him healing the sick, opening the eyes of the blind, getting the lame to walk, he took the risk of rejection from the religious. He took the risk of criticism from people. He took the risk of being criticized. He took the risk of being misunderstood, so much so that he was called someone who has Beelzebub, someone who has legions of demons. He was misinterpreted. He was misunderstood. He was mislabeled. And those were the risks that he took every time he obeyed the Father. Up to this point, those were the only risks he took. But but in this point of his 3 years of ministry, the cost was higher. The price was his life. And I want to dare say here that in every Christian's walk, in every follower of Christ's walk, we will also walk the same path. We will also, in our obedience to God, we will also take the risk of rejection. We will also be taking risks of criticism. We will also be taking risks of being misunderstood or being mislabeled. We will also be taking those risks. But at one point in life, there will come a time when our consistent obedience will take us to the Garden of Gethsemane, where God takes us into a crossroads of a decision to obey God no matter what it costs. Are you following? Are you awake? Are you alive, alert, awake? You didn't eat turkey before coming in here, right? Are you following, church? And so Jesus models this to us, that this is the walk that you will be walking. He said to his disciples, a student is not above his master. If a master goes through this, the student will also. And so everything Jesus goes through, the weight of decisions he had to make, we all encounter that moment where we have to make weighty decisions. I thank God that I haven't reached the part where I have to make a life or death decision in following Christ. I thank God that most of us have not. Maybe some of you, while living in the Middle East, you probably have encountered that kind of persecution, and you probably have had to make a life or death kind of decision in your pursuit of Christ. But for many of us living in Canada, we have not had that risk yet. And then we all are so quick to say, it's so difficult to be a Christian. Right? None of us has been in the Garden of Gethsemane yet. And I'm probably getting ahead of myself, but here's Jesus modeling to us that at some point in your walk with the Father, you will reach a point where you will have to consider, what does my life matter? How much does my life matter to me compared to my pursuit of the Father's will? And Jesus is completely modeling this to us. He literally knows what it's like. First of all, the comfort in this story is that Jesus knows what it's like to be overwhelmed with a sense of paying the price of obedience. He knows what it means to be so sad that you're overwhelmed to the point of wanting a quick death. He knows, to be honest, if we translate this in the modern language, when it says, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful even to death, other translations, he was praying that his death would be quick. It was almost like a suicidal, Lord, just, can I just die now? I don't have to take up the cross. Can this cup of suffering, this process of suffering skip? Can I shortcut the process, Lord? You know my heart. And here's Jesus. He knows exactly that every time we encounter a word in the Bible that challenges us to choose the Father's will, or to whether we choose the Father's will or our will, and how difficult that decision is, he's not flippantly telling us to just obey. He knows the process of making a difficult choice to obey him no matter what. Are you getting me, church? When God calls you, if God calls you out of your comfort zone, you know, we had young people before back home. We, as youth pastors and young adults pastors, we would have young people who is so on fire for Jesus, and then they get home and their mom is like, "Where are you? Where did you come from? Where were you?" "Oh, I was at a youth service." I would rather you'd go to the bars and be a normal young person than always going to this church. And then they banned this young person from going to church because you're not being a normal young person. Why can't you be like all the other young people partying? That's not normal. And they actually banned them from coming to church. And they came to us crying and saying, "What do we do?" And we say, "Well, what does your faith and your passion for Jesus tell you?" "Well, I must choose Jesus." In the Bible, sometimes in the Bible, Jesus said, if anyone does not love their mother, if anyone loves their father, mother, brother, sister more than me, he cannot be my disciple. And we said, "Well, we're not making that decision for you. That is your decision to make. But you know the price." They literally, and this is in the Philippines, 98% Christian. The only Christian nation in Asia. And they literally were told, "If you go back to that youth group, you are not living in this house." And these young people, we would have, it's crazy, right? It sounds crazy, but it's true. And this young person just basically said, "I will honor the Lord. I will respectfully say to my mom." And they paid the price. The mom really kicked her out. The mom kicked her out, and so she had to live with her aunt. And this young person just continued to serve the Lord faithfully in our campus ministry, in our youth ministry. And then finally, the Lord changed her heart's mom, and they got reconciled, and her mom asked forgiveness. But it took a while. See, none of us are experiencing that. Our parents here are encouraging us to attend youth groups. Don't be like the other young people partying. We are so blessed here in Champion Life. But see, at one point, Jesus does not just flippantly give us commands, saying just obey, pick up your cross. When Jesus says, "If you want to be my disciple, pick up your cross," do you think Jesus flippantly said that? In this story, we see how the agony he decided to still go through. He will never give us a command which he himself was never willing to do. And so Jesus literally knows what it's like to be so sad to the point of death. Jesus knows what it's like to be depressed and feel so alone. See, he brought his disciples with him. And church, by the way, this story about him bringing the disciples with him to the Garden of Gethsemane came after all the disciples said, after Peter first led all the disciples to say, "What, no matter what happens, I will die for you, Jesus." And all the disciples said the same. "Yeah, we will die for you, Jesus." In another gospel, actually, in Matthew, I believe, in Matthew, they even said, "We have 2 swords here, Jesus. We will die for you. We will never deny you." This was right before, right? So then he said, "Okay, then come with me." Meaning, join me in my process. Join me in my journey. And it's very interesting that the disciples who were so rah, 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 declare, in the moment of raw emotions, they slept. It's like, okay? And so do you remember the moments where you are going through something very difficult, or you're about to go through something very difficult, and you believe this is what God has called you to do, and you're about to go through that, and you feel so alone because the people who are saying, "I'm with you," are asleep. Right? "Can you please pray for me?" Or okay, emoji. Okay? And so Jesus knows exactly. And oftentimes when we go through those moments, we immediately think, Nobody's with me. I'm alone. Nobody understands exactly how I feel right now. They're just laughing. They were, oh, yesterday at church we had Thanksgiving potluck, but they don't know what I'm about to face this week. They don't know the struggle I'm facing. And I can't count on them because they are just, yeah, we will die for you, but sleeping on the time where it's critical. And I want you to know, church, that if you feel that way about some of us, we probably also feel that way about you sometimes. Because we all are the disciples. We all are the disciples. Truth bomb. Nobody understands me. Oh, you seem to pray for me so casually. You don't really realize the weight of my crisis. Jesus knows exactly how you feel at that moment, and that's a source of hope. Because if you feel that way, Jesus has been there. And here's how Jesus modeled the best response. He said, "Are you still sleeping?" Here's what Jesus did. He prayed again. Even though he woke them up, are you woke yet? And even though he tried to wake them up and found that they could not respond, they were speechless. Yes, Jesus. Well, are you still sleeping? Even though they could not respond, he still went to pray. And sometimes, church, in our walk with God, you will, in your attempt to obey the Lord, and you say, like what Pastor Knapp said last Sunday, not my will, but yours be done. Sometimes that place can feel lonely, but what are you going to do with it? Because Jesus did not quit just because he felt lonely and unsupported by his disciples. He did not throw a tantrum just because nobody was praying with him. He went on praying by himself. It says he went a little farther than James, John, and Peter. And Beth Moore, one of my favorite Bible teachers, preaches about this very powerfully, about going a little farther. Sometimes your friends can only pray this level because they are not completely where you're at. And in their best intentions to pray with you and fight with you, they do not feel exactly what you feel. And so it's not that they don't love you, it's just that they are not in that exact altar you're at, laying down on the altar as a sacrifice. They're not the ones going to be crucified. They're your friends, and they want to support you, but their prayers can only stay at their level, and you must be willing to take it a little farther between you and the Father. Pray up. Look at the person beside you. Pray up, not give up. Pray up, not give up. Jesus modeled to us how to deal with heavy emotions. Now, let me just clarify. I am not talking about heavy emotions as a result of our foolish ways. Okay? The context of this is that God's about he's about to obey God by going to the cross. Now, sometimes in our foolish ways, God will give us a command, and it's going to be heavy. And it's a command that will actually shift our direction in life. It's a command that can actually be a turning point, a pivotal point in our life, wherein if you don't obey, you're going to remain in the mess that your decisions have created. And those moments require a lot of time in prayer. Jesus modeled to us posture in prayer when you're going through that moment. Number one, vulnerability. That you must be vulnerable. Here's Jesus, who is the Son of God, who was and is to come. Here's Jesus, that by him all things were made. Here's Jesus, the living Word. Here's Jesus saying that his soul is deeply sorrowful. Here's Jesus asking God, I really don't want to go through this. Here's Jesus admitting the frailty of his humanity. And he's modeling that to us, church, that if we are his sons, if we are God's sons and daughters, that when we come to the Father in our most difficult moments, it's not the time to try to impress God. It's not the time to say, God, I've been to church how many times? Lord, I know you're going to move in my behalf. I've been faithful. I've been committed. I've served how many ministries, been teaching Sunday school since the founding of the church. And Lord, he did not try to impress the Father so that his prayer will be answered. He just made himself vulnerable. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is actually admitting your frailty. And in that moment of prayer, Jesus models to us that you must show courage. You can only receive strength when you admit your weakness. Paul says, I prayed to the Lord to remove the thorn off my flesh. But God said, my grace is sufficient for you, for where you are weak, there my strength is made perfect. But see, he only received that revelation because he admitted he had a thorn. He was not in denial of his weakness. He was not in denial of his emotions. And when you're not in denial, then you are able to receive a revelation of who God is and what God can do. And here's Jesus modeling vulnerability, did not hide his emotions from the Father, but also he modeled to us that you cannot obey without first praying. Corrie ten Boom, one of my favorite heroes of faith, who's a survivor of World War II Auschwitz. And she says, is prayer your steering wheel or is prayer your spare tire? Is prayer your steering wheel or is prayer your spare tire? Many of us, we want to obey and we keep getting frustrated with ourselves because we can't obey. The question, family, is how many times have you prayed? How much time have you spent in prayer? Jesus says, Lord, if this cup may pass by me, but not my will, but yours be done. That vulnerability precedes surrender. Do you realize when you read the book of Psalms that David does not water down what he's feeling? He does not. He says, break their teeth, Lord. Crush the head of my enemy. Crush the skull. Very brutal. David was really very brutal. I read Psalms and I feel like I'm reading my blog, my private blog. And and I'm not talking about Pastor Knapp's teeth, okay? but here's what Jesus models is that when you are willing to be vulnerable to the Father, and notice he comes to God in the highest, at the peak of the greatest and most difficult command to obey, he calls him Abba, with an affection. Abba. Abba. Do you know that Abba in our modern translation is Dada? Not daddy, not father. It's Abba is like Dada, like a little child. He goes to the Father like a little child, says, Lord, can you please change my circumstance? But if you won't, then change my will. It's a matter of, Lord, you either change my circumstance or you change me. Vulnerability comes before surrender. It's hard to surrender when you can't even admit your struggle. Jesus modeled that he chose not to shy away from the path or process that's marked with suffering and pain. He chose to walk in the narrow road. Now, here's the contrast. What's the contrast here? The disciples. Disciples said, Lord, I will never deny you. Peter said, I will never deny you. I will die to the death, Lord, to the death. I will follow you to the death. All the disciples said, hey, yeah, to the death, let's go. And so they marched with Jesus to the Garden of Gethsemane, to the death, to the death, to the death. And here's Jesus asking them to pray. He gives them a warning when he saw them fall asleep in a very crucial moment. How many of us, we may not be aware we are actually in a crucial moment because we think having the best intention is good enough. Ooh. Let me repeat that. Intention. When Jesus said, the spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak, he's pointing out that intention is not enough to stand temptation. Intention is not enough to stand temptation. Repeat. Intention is not enough to stand temptation. Here are the disciples all rallied up with their intention. We intend to fight to the death. We will never deny you. And they thought that their willing spirit was good enough to stand the temptation. And Jesus tells them, guys, you need to pray because your spirit might be willing, but your flesh is weak. You got this to deal with. You got a muscle memory of fear. You have a muscle memory of sin. How many of you have attended Zumba classes? If you attend a Zumba class, if you were there at the family camp, raise all the hands of those Zumba dancers. If you like to dance and you join a dance lesson, they'll teach you, right? 1, 10, 10, 10, right? And the reason why they keep repeating that is to build muscle memory. In all of us, when we were not yet saved, we built an internal muscle memory of sin, an internal muscle memory of anxiety, wherein every time we encounter a situation, our automatic default response is anxiety. Our automatic default response is rage. Our automatic default response is giving into lust. Do you get what I'm saying? Before we got saved, we have that muscle memory built in us growing up, giving in to all those temptations. It's a muscle memory. And until we are clothed, that's why Paul the Apostle says, to live is Christ, to die is gain, because finally I can perfectly obey God. Because then my body is going to get rid. This muscle memory is going to be completely renewed. Do you get what I mean? Paul says in Romans chapter 7, what I want to do, I don't do. This is Paul the Apostle. And the things I don't want to do, I do. And he talks about the battle between our flesh and our spirit. And here's the disciples having the best intention, willing to follow Jesus all the way till death, but they were not aware that they were still living in the flesh. And flesh cannot accomplish intention. It's prayer. It's prayer. That's why Jesus was modeling to disciples, watch me. Watch me pray. Watch me, Nene. Watch me pray. Okay? Watch me pray. Because he was trying to tell the disciples, I am the Son of God, I am the Messiah, and I'm praying. The Gospel of Luke said that he prayed with sweat dropping like blood. He was praying so hard, I want to do your will. It's painful, Lord, but help me, help me. And he was modeling to his disciples, if I'm doing this, what makes you think you can sleep through this temptation? The contrast here is that the disciples had so much excitement, enthusiasm to follow Jesus, but excitement, enthusiasm can only get you far, but to a certain distance. And Jesus said, keep watch and pray, because the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. Don't trust the flesh. Don't trust just your basic intention or best intention. You can't. You must, no matter how long you've been born again, no matter how long you've been walking with the Lord, and I used to not desire to listen to Christian music. Now, I love listening to Hillsong and Elevation. I must be a changed person. I can go to the places where temptations are, and I can stand because I know I love Jesus. Do you get what I mean? Intention is not enough to stand temptation. Our desire to do the will of God is birthed in our spirit like a seed. But Paul says it is the Spirit of God that actually continually surrendering to the Spirit of God empowers us to change our muscle memory. You get what I mean? What I'm saying? The disciples vowed they would die for Jesus and assumed their intention was enough to do what they said they would do. Jesus, on the other hand, was trying to model to them, wake up. Don't trust your flesh. Don't trust your intention. I don't doubt your intention. I don't doubt your spirit. I know you're willing, but your flesh is weak. And church, many times we go through our days waking up, wanting to do God's will, but not spending time in prayer, and we wonder why at the end of the day we fell into temptation. Jesus modeled to us spending time in deep prayer when you want to obey God. I want you to know, church, that even the smallest things of forgiving your coworker, forgiving your neighbor, forgiving your mom or your dad, or Pastor Happy, if even small things that we feel like, okay, I intend to do that. Spend time in prayer, because that is where we are able to humble ourselves and say, Lord, I don't trust me. I trust you. And I give you my will. Jesus spent energy in prayer. He didn't find rest by sleeping. He didn't find strength by sleeping. Ooh. He didn't find strength to go through a difficult process by sleeping. He found strength to go through a difficult process by praying. In the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 22, verse 43, and we're going to end here. It says, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. The same account, the same story, the Garden of Gethsemane. He was praying with sweat and tears flowing like blood, and asking God 3 times. I would have just stopped at the first time. But no, he kept praying. He kept praying until he received his breakthrough, that I know that I will be able to do this, Lord. You have strengthened me. It's not my strength now. It's your strength. And actually he says, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. How many moments have we missed receiving strength because we were too much in a hurry in our prayer time? Oh, Lord, I'm about to have a very difficult conversation with my coworker or my boss. Lord, help me, Jesus. Thank you, bye. And the angel was just about to come, but bye. Oh, where did he go? Right? The angel came after the 3rd time he prayed. And so many times we quit on the first prayer because we're not receiving the strength. Oh, maybe the Lord will give me the strength later on. But no, I want to challenge us, church, to develop our prayer life in a way that we get on our knees and say, God, I really need you. And I really cannot rely on myself. And I really cannot obey you just by my strength. I can't. I need you, Jesus, and until you receive a breakthrough. Prayer is God's prescribed way of letting his divine power collide with our weak humanity. One of my favorite theologians, a Danish philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard, he said, prayer does not change God, but it changes him who prays. Changes him who prays. And so sometimes it might not be a change of circumstance that's really needed. Sometimes it might be a change of us that's really needed. Let's pray.